Thank you for having me and for allowing me to speak. You know why we're here today. We're here to ask you whether or not, number one, you're happy with the way the state of California is being run. And if not, would you like to do something about it? Yeah! Contrary to popular opinion, and I know in the newspaper the other day they wrote an article, it's a nice article, but they said that this was more of a pep rally. And I disagree with that, because I'm going to ask you to do something about this when we finish with this program. This isn't a pep rally, this is an action item. This train has been on the same track in California for 50 years, and the line is down. We have skyrocketing debt, we have out of control government, we have laws that don't do us any good and don't make our lives easier. In fact, 800 laws were passed in California in the last legislative session. And I can't think of a single one that didn't make your life more difficult, more expensive, and more onerous. I can't think of a single law that made your lives better. And that's what we're here to change. Now, the way to change that is by forming a state which protects the individual, protects our right to property, has a constitutional framework that's immutable. And what we want to do with the state of Jefferson, we want to avoid the mistakes that California has made. One of the biggest mistakes California has made, in my opinion, is since 1849, the Constitution's been amended 521 times. 521 times in 163 years. That's how easy it is to amend the California Constitution to embrace the cause of the day, if you will. Judge Posner from the Seventh Circuit made a very interesting statement at the conclusion of the decision which he lost. And he said, it is capable for evil to enter the legal system when jurists embrace the cause of the day. And that's what we've done in California. Our Constitution changes with the whim of the cause of the day. Whether that's environmentalism, energy, compliance, clean air, whatever. We change the Constitution every time someone wants to change a law. And that makes it more difficult for someone with common sense or reason or a different point of view to change it back the way it was. In other words, once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. So what we're suggesting is the formation of a new state. Now this is in Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. It's referred to as a state split. It's been done 4 times in our history. Massachusetts was a part of Maine, Vermont was a part of New York, Tennessee was a part of Virginia, and I believe, I can't remember now, I think it was Kentucky was part of Virginia. So 4 times. It's legal, it's ethical, it's moral, there's precedent for it, it's been done before. It's a very simple paragraph legally in order to do this. Nor shall any state be formed from the territory within one state or the combination of 2 states unless the legislatures of the states involved agree and Congress agrees. So what we need to do is we need to form a basis of common goal. We need to form a consensus. We need to get enough governmental entities or political entities or public entities to agree that they want to join this effort. And once we've achieved that through the declaration process, that's the process we chose to use, once we've achieved enough of these declarations to form a viable state, then we intend to take the declarations to Sacramento. Now, when we have these declarations passed, mind you, the boards of supervisors are not required to take any action. They're simply affirming what the people are asking them to do, and that is to separate from California and form the state of Jefferson. So once we take the declaration to Sacramento, then we have the Legislative Council draw up a piece of legislation. The counties would be involved with the above legal descriptions wish to withdraw from the state of California. It's as simple as that. These declarations are not complex. They only need to be 2 sentences long. California is ungovernable in its present form, and we want to start over by forming a new state. Any language in the middle is simply an affirmation of the unique problems for Butte County or Del Norte County or Siskiyou County. In other words, the logic and the reasons why you want your supervisors to affirm this declaration. Now, mind you, you're not asking permission for anything. You're asking for an affirmation of what you know needs to be done. And this, as opposed to a resolution, causes no action. A county resolution, they would have to direct county agencies to do things, it would cost money, and it would take time away from other duties. This does not. It's simply a declaration of the desire to withdraw and petition the state. Now the language is very interesting. We've come up with that language through a long process with constitutional attorneys for one reason. because there are three legs to a federal assault on any law. One leg is you have to ask for something. We're asking for a new state because we have no representation in the state where we live. The second leg of that stool is there has to be some harm. In other words, we ask the state for something and they say no. So if the state says yes, we get our own state, provided Congress agrees. If the state says no, there's been harm. Now, the third element in any federal case is very, very important. There has to be a remedy. In other words, if the court can't help you with what you've been refused, then they dismiss the case. But in this case, what is the remedy for our harm? More representation. What is it we want? More representation. Now, why do I say lack of representation? Because in California, we're number 50 out of 50 for lack of representation. Every state senator represents 950,000 people. If each state senator got one call from every constituent once a year, he'd have to answer the phone 3,960 something times a day, and he'd be able to spend exactly 8 seconds with each caller. As you can see, that's not very effective representation. Now in New Hampshire, as opposed to California, each representative has 3,000 constituents. Not 300,000, not 30,000, 3,000. You know how much a political campaign costs in New Hampshire? It's about $1,000. The guy, he files, and he fills his car with gas, and he goes and he knocks on 3,000 doors, and he can do it. And do you know why people like that? Because if this guy does something wrong, they're going to see him in Walmart the next day. And it's very easy to let them know that he did something that they don't approve of. Where here in California, if any one of you wanted to call your state senator, I doubt very seriously you'd get him on the phone the first day, maybe not even the first week. That's something we have to change, because what that causes is a lack of empathy. It's a lack of empathy for your life. You have no power to direct events that affect your life. The northern third of California has 4 representatives, depending upon how you count the territory. The city of Los Angeles has about 35. So as you can see, we are literally and figuratively powerless to affect any change that impacts our lives directly. Now, another result of lack of representation is, for example, the fire tax. Now, I know a lot of people like to seize on this as oh gosh, we're a one-issue deal. But this is simply representative of a great many things. Carve, the bathroom law, and I could go on and on. But the fire tax is a good one because it's very illustrative of how things work in California. The fire tax was largely passed by urban legislators whose constituents don't pay the tax. Can you imagine how easy it is to create revenue generators when you know for a fact there's going to be absolutely no political fallout from the people who elected you? And that's why we have the fire tax, because our representation, no matter how bad they wanted to defeat that, we're simply powerless to do anything about it. Now, I'm not saying our representatives are bad people. They're not. They're good men, and they're swinging. Your supervisors, they're good people. They're swinging for you. But they need to know what you want. They are your representatives, and you need to instruct them as to how you wish them to behave. And that's an important component in this. So now, how do we do this? We get our declarations, we go and we have our legislation introduced, and hopefully that's when the education process begins. So what we need to do is we need to have town hall meetings in Los Angeles, we need to have town hall meetings in Fresno and Kern County and all over the place. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to communicate with all of the people you know in other areas and explain to them why we need their help to make this happen. And I'm also going to ask you to contact one of your supervisors every single day, or every other day, or if you don't have time, every third day. But I'm going to ask you to do something to make this happen if this is what you want to happen. Because the result of inaction is nothing. And a great many things are possible with our new state, a great many things. And none of these things are possible unless we achieve this. So we're going to have to let Sacramento know in no uncertain terms how it is we want our elected officials to behave, and we're not going to take no for an answer. And that's the key to this whole thing. Now, why do we need to do this? First of all, California used to have a federal model of government. The federal model of government meant that every county had a state senator. And I think there was a provision in the Constitution that very small counties, like I think Sierra County, because they only have 3,000 people, they could be lumped in with another county. No more than 3 counties, and they had to touch one another. They had to be contiguous. And each one of those counties had their own senator. Well, in 1965, the Warren Court decided to disobey the Constitution, ignore the will of the people, and they passed, they decided on a case called Sims versus Reynolds. Sims versus Reynolds essentially said that votes cannot represent acres and trees. One vote has to represent one person. And the dissenting justice in that case predicted exactly what's happening now. He said that assemblies would be rubber stamps for one another, and that it wouldn't be long before 5 or 6 urban centers in the United States would control all politics, because that's where most of the votes are. So what we have also in the dissent was a justice who recognized that perhaps votes do not represent rocks and trees, but they do represent communities and what communities need. And communities are geographically dependent. They're dependent on water and forests, and they're dependent on farming and ranching or industry or whatever that community uses to make a living. But our communities now, because of one man, one vote, have become absolutely irrelevant in the state of California. So also, when we recognize this, then we can go a step further. The last 2 governors of California have never been in my county. They don't even know where it is. In fact, a Fox News reporter called me on the phone. He wanted to come up and interview. I said, sure. He had to Google Siskiyou County because he didn't know what road to take to get there. This guy lives in Sacramento. He's only 5 hours away. So if you want to look at it this way, California is nothing but a huge public service corporation. And what we have here is we have a division called Northern California, and that division is poorly managed. It loses money decade after decade. It's lost money for 50 or 60 years. In fact, Northern California has lost money ever since Sims versus Reynolds was decided, because we lost our representation at that point. In 1950, California had $5 billion in debt. By 1970, it was 13% of GDP, and now it's 18 or 19% of our gross domestic product for the entire state is debt. It's around $500 billion. That was the result of Sims versus Reynolds. No balance, no check on power. So, once again, we have an unused division called Northern California, and we're constantly losing money. Well, if you were in business, what would you do? You'd have 2 choices. Number 1, sell the loser or shut it down. Number 2 is replace management and put management in there that will manage that division correctly and get it to be profitable again. Now, that's not going to happen because most of the stockholders like the present management. They're the people in the city with all the votes. So what we're asking for is a corporate spin-off. If you can't run your division, if you don't want to go to the building, if you've never even been inside the building, why not let local talent have a chance to turn this division around? And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for a state where counties have the lion's share of the power. We're asking for a state with a framework that protects the individual, protects his right to property, and protects his ability to make a living for himself and his children. I don't know about you all. How many here have had kids that moved away because they couldn't make a living here? I see quite a few hands going up. My son left. He's never coming back because he said he couldn't make a living in Siskiyou County. And guess what? He's right. So what I would like to do is create a state where my son and his children can come and live and afford to raise their family and have a decent life. We have a beautiful place here, and it belongs to us. But if we don't do something about this, none of this is going to matter, and we might as well just go along with whatever is done to us. Okay, so now what's the next step here? What can we do to make this happen? Well, we can do exactly what your committee's done in Butte County. They formed a committee of responsible people who are following through, and they're going to get a declaration passed by the Board of Supervisors here, even if they have to elect new members to that board. And that's what we're going to do in all of the counties that are interested. I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm here to ask you whether you're tired of the way you're living now and whether you'd like to do something about that. Now, what are the arguments against this? Typically, the argument we get most commonly, and this is from established politicians, I agree with everything you say. In fact, we have 2 supervisors here who have said this to me, and I'm not going to name them. I agree with everything you say. You're absolutely right. The state is onerous. It can't be governed. Something needs to be done about it. But I can't vote for that because it's too hard. It's too hard. I hope that's not the new standard for American behavior. Because, you know, it comes to mind Jimmy Doolittle standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier in 1941, and he's going to take off with 25 guys and fly to Tokyo, and he knows he doesn't have enough gas to get back. And he's going to drop the first bombs on the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. I'm certainly glad he didn't say to himself, gosh, this is too hard. I think I'm going to go below deck and have a sandwich. George Washington sitting at the table across the Delaware from Trenton, New Jersey, and he's writing at his desk, and his buddy Dr. Warren's talking to him, and he's furiously writing on these scraps of paper. And Warren grabs one, and he says, what are you doing? He's tearing these papers into little bits, and he's writing on them. And he's writing the words, liberty or death. That was the password for the attack on Christmas Day on the Hessians in Trenton, New Jersey. And these guys walked 9 miles with no shoes. In fact, you could follow their trail by the blood left in the snow, because they had rags wrapped around their shoes. They had to cross the river filled with ice, fight, and then instead of going back, they swung around the bridge to Princeton and fought again. I'm certainly glad they didn't say, you know, gosh, this is a little bit hard. I think we should just stay in camp for the next couple of weeks. John Kennedy said in 1969, I remember I was a little kid, not that little, but he said, we're going to send a man to the moon in this decade, and not because it's easy, but because it's hard. So I think the argument that this is too hard is irrelevant to us as Americans. Certainly hard things used to be a challenge to us that we accepted readily. In fact, we made a country based on that principle. The other argument that we typically get is, what are we going to do without the money? And this comes from conservative politicians who say, I'm a conservative, but I cannot fathom a government in which I don't have my hand out to a progressive agenda. What are we going to do without the welfare money? My answer to that is, we're going to do just fine. Because we're going to figure it out. And personally, if I lived in a free state, I could live with a couple of potholes in a county government that had used equipment. I've never had new equipment in my life. I think a free state is important because it would allow us to develop a constitutional framework that has a friendly business environment, a friendly regulatory environment. We don't need 570 state agencies to run a small rural state. We need to amend some of the contracts and some of the ways that we do business, but we're certainly smart enough to do that. There is enough money to form a viable state. We would not be the smallest state, we would not be the least populous state. I believe Mike's going to address that, so I won't go any further into that. So we have the opportunity to do that. What are the reasons we really want to leave? I know Robert in the back, he wrote me a letter that said a trucking company in Reading is going to lose $12 million over CARB in 1 year. They're going to lose 21 rigs, 21 jobs, and have to overhaul everything they have. I've got a $4,000 tractor, 1978 International, 1466 for all you guys at farm. It's a big, nice tractor for 1978, runs like a watch, cost me $4 grand. I'm going to have to put a $20,000 exhaust filter on that tractor in a county that had 0 poor air quality days last year. So we have no air quality issues in the state of California. Siskiyou Pellet Mill had to stop making finishing pellets for cattle because the the State Air Resources Board said they were making too much dust. This pellet mill's in the middle of nowhere, for gosh sakes. The cows make more dust walking past the mill than the mill does making the noise. Yet we're forced to comply with air quality standards for cities that are 500 and 600 and 700 miles away, that are initiated by politicians who do not know how we live, do not know what it takes for us to conduct our lives, don't know how much it costs, have never been to our area, and quite frankly have no empathy for that, because they think it's a good idea. And if we address the debt and some of these other issues, and I could go on for hours, but I know we have other speakers, so I won't. But I want to thank you for allowing us to come here. I'd like to thank you for your attention and for considering this possibility. And we can make this a reality, but it's up to you to do it. It's up to us to make this happen. We are the people mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. Government serves at the will of the people. They derive all of their just power from the people. Government has one purpose, and one purpose only: to defend the rights of the individual according to the Constitution. And remember, we don't have freedoms. We traded some of those freedoms to government in order to form a contract where they will protect the liberties that we hold most dear. Freedom of speech, our rights to property, the rights of the individual, the right to assemble. We traded some of the freedom we have in order to guarantee those liberties. Those liberties are inalienable rights. You were born with them. You don't have to ask anybody for them, and you don't have to ask anybody's permission to use them. Those rights are quantified and guaranteed in the Constitution of the United States. But if you don't stand up and demand that guarantee be honored, then it's not a guarantee at all. Thank you very much.
Next up, got to adjust on Mike, he's a big guy. Next up is Caleb, and Caleb, you're going to be speaking on history. Okay, we have a hand for Caleb.
I'm short and young, as I look out at the crowd. I am going to be talking about the history today. The state of Jefferson actually goes all the way back prior to the inception of the state of California. The state of California escaped state division in 1850 by the Missouri Compromise, or the Compromise of 1850. During that time, there was the issue of slavery here in the United States, and so California came into the Union as a free state so that Missouri could go for the southern states. But by 1854, our state legislators and the House of Representatives decided, even 4 years after statehood, that the state was ungovernable. So they put in a bill through the House of Representatives, basically creating the state of Shasta here in the North State. It is almost the exact same parameters as the state of Jefferson that we propose today, and it passed. But it did not pass the Senate. By 1859, the PICO Act was put through. That basically separated Southern California, around the Los Angeles area and south, from the state of California. It passed both the state House, the state Senate, the governor signed it, and in 1859, 1860, they took it back east and they realized, oh wow, there's a war going on back here. So it didn't pass. Congress completely ignored it. About every 20 years, separation came up again until 1941. That's where we got the moniker of the state of Jefferson. So in 1941, in December, the state of Jefferson almost became a state. But Pearl Harbor happened, and we put the state of Jefferson on hold because of World War II. In the 1960s, state of Jefferson came up again. In the 1980s, it came up again. In 1992, it came up again. And here we are today, once again, talking about the state of Jefferson. I would say that we have a lot of precedents, a lot of it. But the biggest difference with the state of Jefferson today is that Reynolds v. Sims was passed in 1964. This isn't about our roads being bad. This isn't about we don't have communication lines, we don't have trains, we don't have roads, we don't have cars. This is about the fact that our constitutional right has been taken away from us because of Reynolds v. Sims. We are unrepresented in Northern California. And now I want to tell you a little bit about me. I'm 23 years old. I'm a mom. My son is almost 1 year old. And I'm a Chico State alum. I graduated here in 2010. I worked at Bidwell Mansion. So for those of you who know Bidwell Mansion and have not been there, I desperately encourage you to go. It's beautiful. If you need to know more about the city of Chico or about the state of California, Bidwell Mansion is the place to be. And the reason why is because John Bidwell helped to write the first constitution of the state of California in 1850. He was a very, very important man in California history. But as I was there, and as I was working at Bidwell Mansion, I worked there for 2 years, I started reading through the Bidwell diaries, because it was part of my job to know more about the personal history of John Bidwell. And as I'm reading through it, I come across a name in the diaries, and that name is Thomas Wilson Polk. And I kind of cock my head and I go, Thomas Wilson Polk, that sounds a lot like my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. So I go to my genealogy, and it was my great-great-grandfather who met with John Bidwell. And they talked about selling walnuts and logging and ranching and all that fun stuff, because he owned a lot of property out in the Lake County area. And I read further into the diaries because I'm all giddy to hear what else my grandfather did with John Bidwell, and I come across another name, and that name was Oliver Hartley Mann, who was my husband's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And I sat there and I thought about that, and I just was like, what are the odds? I mean, seriously, what are the odds that my husband's great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather met with John Bidwell on the same day, they knew each other, and today my husband, who is a veteran of the U.S. Army, can't get a job in the North State. I have my bachelor's degree, I'm currently in grad school. I can't get a job in the North State. They call me too educated. How can you be too educated for a job? I mean, come on, right? And that's the problem that your young people are having. You guys have Chico State just down the road here. How many of those alumni actually stay in the area? Not very many. They can't get jobs here. A lot of your young people are leaving the North State because our economy is folding. In Shasta County alone, in the last 20 years, we have lost 73% of our economy. I repeat that one more time. We have lost 73% of our economy. That is 73% less jobs, 73% less employees. That is 73% less of everything because your economy is folding. Why is it folding? Reynolds versus Sims. Because the cities have decided that they know what's best for us, and they are doing that. They are passing legislation that is hurting our economy. CARB will hurt our economy. And it will hurt our economy because the truckers won't be driving up here. If the truckers aren't driving up here, where do you get your food, your merchandise, and your fuel? Where does it come from? So I encourage you to support the state of Jefferson because we really are looking out for everybody here in the North State. We want our children, we want our grandchildren to have the same freedoms in the place that we call home. And that is the very, very beautiful place of Northern California, and especially the city of Chico. Once again, my alma mater. Thank you.
Next up, Mike Wacker, and Mike will be talking on the vision for Jefferson.
I've heard that a picture's worth 1,000 words, so we'll have a few less words. Okay, good evening. Really glad everybody's here tonight. I know many of you are enthusiastic and probably have a vision about the new state of Jefferson and what it'll look like. But then you may wonder, is this a pipe dream or could it really happen? For the next few minutes I want to talk about reality. We'll look at how the new state of Jefferson would compare to other similar states, and this will help us understand not that it's just possible, but it really can be happening. We want to see if there are states with similar size that protect our personal freedom and that are sensible about spending money. George Mason University had a great project called Freedom in 50 States. They analyzed dozens of types of freedom, such as property rights, civil rights, and then summarized them on a map. And this map shows the 5 freest states in orange. We've got basically North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and New Hampshire. And you've heard about New Hampshire before tonight. Okay, then we ask, what about the states that are most fiscally responsible and have the lowest tax burdens? Again, a publication came to our aid, at USA Today not long ago, had an article about the tax burdens of 50 states. The blue highlighted states over here are the ones that have the lowest tax burden. Now we added California to that map, and you'll hear the numbers in just a few minutes, just to give you a comparison about how the states that are doing it well are handling it, and how California's handling it. In both of these states, both of the studies, 2 states rank very high, South Dakota and New Hampshire. They fit our criteria because of the freedom and the sensibleness area, but they also fit it because their size and their population is very close to ours. So let's use these 2 examples. When we look at the details, we will see real-life examples of how such amazingly better things could be for Jefferson. Okay, the first part of the table here, now, I realize it's, we never know how deep the audience is going to be. I think all of you got one of these when you came in, so if you can't read the numbers from that far away, please use the little handout they gave you at the door. Okay, first we talk about size. Jefferson, depending on which counties come in, will probably be about 800,000 to 1 million people. If you've seen some of our maps on our trifold out there and that type of thing, you'll get that. So we're talking about New Hampshire, which is 1.3 million, or South Dakota, which is 845,000. Incidentally, California is about 38.3 million now. So as has been pointed out by Mark very aptly, that makes it pretty damn ungovernable. Now the freedom score that they had in this study here showed South Dakota was number 2 out of 50, and New Hampshire was number 4. Well, guess where California is? 49 out of 50. And I think we tie for bottom every other year or something like that. So, but the other thing we look at is the tax burden. Now here, California's got an 11.2% tax burden, whereas South Dakota and New Hampshire have 7.6 and 8.1. So that makes a big difference. We go over to the yellow part of your chart, and here we're looking, what that translates into dollars per capita. That means you, your babies, your kids, everybody, $4,934 is how much they take out in state and local taxes every year in the state of California. They compare that total tax, okay, to South Dakota is a little over 3,000, and New Hampshire is a little over 3,700. So why is that? Well, for one thing, California's got a pretty hefty sales tax. It's officially 7.5%, but a lot of the local agencies like to bump that up, so it's usually more than that. Then we move to South Dakota. It's got a 4% sales tax, which is about half of ours. And guess what? New Hampshire has no sales tax whatsoever. Then we go over to probably one thing that's kind of interesting, it's pretty consistent for all of these states, is that they take about the same amount of money in per taxpayer as the sales tax and the property tax. Because there we're talking about $2,300 for California, about $2,100 for South Dakota, and $2,400 for New Hampshire. So that looks pretty, California looks pretty equal there. So what's the difference here? Well, California has an income tax, and it's even more brutal than the federal income tax. But not by the amount that they take, but by the rules and stuff. New Hampshire has no income tax on earnings, and just a small percent on the interest and dividends. South Dakota has no income tax whatsoever. So instead of $1,229 that California takes out per capita, we're talking about $63 to New Hampshire and $0 to South Dakota. Now, it doesn't end there. Then we got all kinds of tricks to get fees and licenses and all this stuff. And it's pretty interesting with your car license, where we got the 2 states that we're looking at as examples of $66 and $68. When we passed Proposition 30 last year, that's going to jack up the car license fee in California to where a few years from now it's going to be $675 for a typical car. So then they get you even on the gasoline. We're talking about $200 a year in taxes in our example states, and it's now $532 in California. So, you know, a few $100 there, $1,000 here, and California really gets up there. Because you look back at the total per capita state and local taxes, that's $4,900 per capita. You got a family of 4, that's $20,000 that the state of California is getting out of your family every year. And then we know what they're doing with it. That's even more criminal. Okay, the blue part of the table is results that are reality. Since the businesses are leaving and going under, unemployment is much higher in California, personal income is down, and folks are leaving. Meanwhile, in New Hampshire, and especially South Dakota, unemployment is low, personal income is up, and people are moving in. When Jefferson is open for business, don't you think the same thing will happen, or even better? What we have here is a vision based on reality. This is states that are really doing it and doing a darn good job. And there's no reason in the world that we can't do better because we've got theirs example. We know what they've done, we know what they've done wrong. They can't have done everything right. So we can even have better things to look forward to than that. The reality is that we live right here, and if we had a much freer, much more prosperous state, a state which would be much less likely that our kids would leave for greener pastures. Maybe your son would come back, Mark, and one of our sons had moved out, and because there's just all kinds of potential up here. So anyway, thank you for your attention. Hopefully.
Thanks, Mike. You really cheered us up. Well, that dovetails right into something that I was going to talk about. If I can find my notes, they're gone. He probably sabotaged me here. He's my friend, you do that. No, my notes there behind me. Nope. No, they were here.
Oh, did Mark?
Okay, well, I had a prepared speech, but you know what, I can wing it. What I want to talk about is just common sense stuff. You know, we're talking about, can the state of Jefferson be a viable state? And quite clearly, it can. Oh, thank you. Yep. California is a wealthy state. There's no question about it. I mean, we produce, what, 13.4% of the gross domestic product of the entire nation, right here. We are ranked the 12th most powerful economy in the world. Now, you would think, all things being equal, with that kind of revenue, that kind of tax base, man, we would have the best freeways, the best bridges, we would have the lowest taxes, we would have the best services. Yes, right. We don't. And instead, what we've got are the highest taxes. Now, there's something wrong with this. How could it be where you have this massive revenue and it takes all these additional taxes to shore up government? It's because, quite simply, they have a spending problem. We have not been able to address this in Sacramento. We see it, we complain about it, we yell and scream as best we can, but we don't have the representation to do a thing about it. Southern California has the bulk of the population, they get the bulk of the revenues. Our taxes often go down to SoCal to support their endeavors. And they're getting ready to do it to us again with the tunnel project. Going to start this North State Drive with the giant tunnels going to Los Angeles. What do you think that's going to do for the economy?
Destroy all the fishing in California.
It's going to destroy all the fishing and plus a lot of businesses too.
All that general fund's going to be zero thanks to what they're doing.
So our financial analysis of this project shows that there are some counties in the state of Jefferson that are operating in the red, and there's some counties that are operating in the black, and they're barely making it. We are not a prosperous area. But if you take the sum of all the counties that are designed to participate in the state of Jefferson, we should be able to make it just fine. Now that's if we kept the status quo, but we're not here to keep the status quo. We want less government, less intrusion, more freedom. So this is going to lead to a more prosperous state. We can do better than the state has done because we're going to bring government closer to the people. Prove my point, you know, we've had an exodus out of California for, well, since 1990 that we've been counting. And we have lost millions of people, millions of jobs. Businesses have closed up and moved to other states. And what's that done for us? 1 in 5 Californians is now living on some sort of assistance. This has also had an impact on our crime rate. You know, our prisons are so overcrowded, we had no choice but to start releasing them we had no place to put them. That's what comes from an impoverished state. Now, the California services are prolific. We spend a lot of money on them. In fact, we spend more money on these services than any other state in the union. That's part of our spending problem. You know, we got what, 1,100 committees and commissions, and then you throw another 550 state agencies. That's a lot of bureaucracy, and it costs a lot of money. No wonder the revenues from our infrastructure can't balance the budget. They have to come looking to you to take it out of your pocket, and where's the bang for the buck? What do we got to show for it? Do we have better highways? Do we have better law enforcement? Do we have better bridges? You know, what has happened here in the state of California? Well, not a heck of a lot in Northern California, I can tell you that. So we think by bringing government closer to the people, we in Northern California can do a much better job. Well, mostly because the threshold is so low, I mean, anybody can step over that bar. As Mike alluded to, you know, California ranks fourth in high income tax. We have also the highest 1% tax bracket. And for total taxes, you know, all the cumulative stuff you pay at DMV, the grocery store, and so on, we're number one in the nation. So when I say I think we can do better than, you know, being the most taxed in the nation, yeah, sure, we're going to reduce overhead. Got to reorganize my notes here. Somebody's done it for me. So anyway, California has a lot to offer. Northern California has a lot to offer. And we feel that the state of Jefferson, with all of our natural resource diversities, with our available workforce, thanks to a lot of jobs leaving the state, you know, and people being unemployed, with a lot of regulatory obstacles removed, with a business-friendly climate, we can start to turn this around again. And we can have the kind of state that we'd all like to have. There's so many things that are in our favor. We just have to have that vision like Mike was talking about, and the will. We can make it happen. This is doable. If I didn't think this was possible, I wouldn't be up here. And the more that I do this, the more I think it is possible. But put it another way, is there ever going to be a better time? And I think not. So the bottom line here, we have an outstanding North state of Jefferson. We are going to rid ourselves of a lot of problems, starting with the bullet train, the water tunnel, the prison overcrowding, the high crime, the gangs in the southern state. The 3 of the top 10 most violent cities in the nation are going to be out of the state of Jefferson. We're not going to have to deal with those problems, and why should we? Because we didn't create them. So when it gets right down to it, and you look at what we have to offer, Jefferson, as a state, has hit the economic jackpot. We are going to be a magnet, not for welfare, but for jobs and businesses, and we're going to regulate it the way we want to preserve our natural resources, to keep the overhead low, to have a limited government and maximum freedom. You can't lose with that, folks. That's why we say, the time has come for 51. Now, the next gentleman up is a former assemblyman. Stan, you want to step forward? Has been involved in politics for decades. He has represented the North State. He's been involved in an effort to divide the state for the same reasons that we're here, taxation without representation. So Stan can really give us some great insight. Stan, it's all yours.
You know, you're also very good, and it was interesting listening to the history from Kayla. Of course, Kayla is short and young, and I'm tall and old. And that's the only thing we have to differ on, I think. By the way, let me start with a couple of points. That man there, Thomas Jefferson, our third president, is my favorite of all the presidents. As a matter of fact, I've created some 51st State stationery. On the bottom of the stationery, it says a quote of his, because Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "A little rebellion now and then is necessary for the sound health of government." I wish I would have said that, because he said a lot of swell things. And my second favorite president is Zachary Taylor. He's an old guy. He's not around anymore. I never knew Zach. I'm not that old. But when California became a state, received statehood, Zachary Taylor, the President of the United States, had an argument with Congress. His very first argument, he kept saying over and over, "Why did you give California statehood? In the future, it'll be too big to manage." So a bullseye from Zachary Taylor and a bullseye from Thomas Jefferson. And then, as Kayla was pointing out, there have been so many countless attempts to divide California. In 1859, when California was just 9 years old, Andrews Pico, a California assemblyman, introduced a bill to divide California at the Tehachapi Mountains, so that San Diego and Los Angeles are one state, and Bakersfield to the Oregon borders, another state. Two very much better homogeneous states. By the way, when Mark was up here, he was talking about all the legislation. You know, I bumped into Jerry Brown a couple of weeks ago and had a conversation at Frank Pat's restaurant in Sacramento. Jerry Brown and I, we don't have a lot in common. We do have one thing in common. We have the same birth date in April. And one time a chief of staff of Jerry Brown's literally forced, the chief of staff told me, literally forced Jerry Brown to send me a birthday note. You know, happy birthday. And B.T. Collins was his name. I asked B.T., he's dead now, but I asked B.T., how did you get the governor to do that, B.T.? I said, well, I just told him, I said, you know, if you want your programs to pass, these people have to vote for them. Send some birthday notes. He said, well, I'm the governor, I want to do that. And B.T. actually forced him to do that. Little did I know that Jerry Brown wanted to be governor forever. Otherwise, I would have saved that note. You know, I always have hope up for Jerry Brown, because years ago when he was first elected as a California governor in 1974, his slogan was, "Small is beautiful." I mean, he was actually on it. But then, you know, Jerry Brown's a strange guy. The thing I like about him, he's very unpredictable. So you don't know what he's going to do. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's that other thing. And so as Mark was pointing out to you, last year, 800 bills for new laws passed the California legislature. They all went to the governor. Of the 800, I'm rounding these numbers off, of the 800 that went to the governor, he signed 700 of them into law and vetoed 100. He really has to learn to do some more vetoing. And of those 700 he passed into law, there's some very strange and unneeded laws there, really. You know, it's easy to bring to mind some of those that get a lot of press. For instance, you know, California is easily headed, and already gay marriage is permitted, and now Jerry Brown has signed another law into another bill into law that has changed the way we're supposed to look at genders, because as of 10 days ago, there's something called transgender. I don't know. I want to show of hands here. How many people here have been struggling with their sexual identity? Raise your hand. That gentleman was when he was 16. Well, now, if you're struggling with your sexual identity, you're living in California, you can go into any restroom you want, you can join any athletic club you want, because that's the law. Somebody once said years and years ago They were trying to describe politics in California, and they said, and I used to use this in speeches all the time, they said, if you're describing California politically, here's how you want to describe it. If America is turned on its side, everything loose winds up in California. To put it in Spanish, correcto mente. That's exactly what's happened. And so anyway, I don't want to take too much time here. I want to indicate to you that I started a non-profit corporation. It's called twocalifornias.com. And I created, because I have the 51st state in mind, I've had it in mind for 25 years, I created some, what I call commemorative cups. If you drink coffee, I have 51 of these commemorative cups, and I gave a couple away tonight, and I'm using them to raise money. I've raised a few $1,000s already because I'm traveling from Tule Lake to San Diego and raising money and paying for the travel and paying for stamps and paying for stationery. And as of 2 weeks ago, I now have a produced 51st state song that was produced and it's been copyrighted, and I should have brought it with me.
Want to sing it?
Well, the lyrics, I can remember the first lyric. We're all trying to make the work in a state of confusion to Californians. That's the real solution. Only it's a very more commercial song because I asked the composer and the singer, I said, put the very smallest amount of country in there, but make it a crossover. You see, when I was 16, like that gentleman over there, the only thing I ever really wanted to be in life was a disc jockey. And I actually became a Motown disc jockey. And then I went to television because I got so much experience on radio playing Dionne Warwick and Mick Jagger and all those people. And I remember I was playing Andre Castellanos when I went down to the AP, the Associated Press wire, and it wouldn't stop. Ding, 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 ding. I didn't know what's happened. And I looked at the wire that I'm supposed to read. I'm the only one on the radio station in Yuba City. And it says the president has been shot. I didn't know what to do, and so I just played some quiet music. I mean, I would have preferred to have played Pat Boone, Tutti Frutti El Rudy, but I just played the quiet music, and I kept going back to the Associated Press, and finally it says, Kennedy has been shot, and I really didn't know what to do. It was just, even today I can feel the emotion come back, and so I didn't say anything. Pretty soon the general manager showed up, and we just played soft music and read things that came off the wire for the rest of the evening. And what a trip that was. So I did radio, then I did television, and several people asked me in television for 10 years, reading the news at 6 and 11 o'clock, I found out just how everything loose does wind up in California. And then people were asking me, I went to the Central Committee and they asked me to run for the Assembly, so I did. But because I was on television and I was never found running down the street naked, I got more votes than the person I was running against, who was Vice Mayor Chico at the time. And I won by a landslide. At that time, politics always changes in America. So I was running against a Democrat in a Democrat district. Now it's a Republican district. But I won overwhelmingly because I'd spent so many years on television. We make a mistake when we watch people on television, and there have been studies on this. One, you tend to believe them because they wouldn't be on television unless they were intelligent and knew what they were saying. Well, strike that out of your mind. But it's a lot of fun. So I fell in love with politics, and I was down there 20 years, and after 15 years, now you cut me off whenever I should shut up. After 15 years, I realized we could never balance a budget, we could never do this, we could never do that. We'd all reformed education 3 times. And so the first time in my 18 years in the California Assembly, I called the Speaker, Willie Brown, and I said, Mr. Speaker, I call him Willie today, but then I was calling him Mr. Speaker. I said, could I speak to you for just a couple of minutes? He always calls me Stanley, and he said, what do you want to talk about, Stanley? And I said, well, only take a couple of minutes. Well, come on down. So, because since I came from television, I rushed to the bathroom and pulled my hair and adjusted my tie. And I thought everything was in place, and I went into the Speaker's office, and I said, thank you for seeing me. He said, what are you going to do, Stan? And I said, well, I'm going to introduce a bill that I think people are going to laugh at. and I'm quite serious about it, however. He said, well, what's the bill? He became very impatient. He's very fast, and he's very funny. And I said, I'm going to literally introduce a bill to divide California into 2 states. And Willie Brown doesn't mince words when he speaks. I want to clean this up for you, because I'm going to tell you right now, I wrote it in the book that I'm publishing, because the minute I told him I wanted to introduce a bill to divide California, he said, okay, you would not want me to help you with that? I was actually stunned. I said, Mr. Speaker, you would actually help me? He said, Stanley, and here's where I'm going to clean it up. He said, no, I was elected in '64. In '66, I realized this state was way too effing big to be just one state. And besides that, I don't want all my enemies in just one state. He's very intelligent, and he's very funny. And I want to thank you very much. And if anybody wants to help me, grab a cup, give your name and address, and come up and see me before I leave here this evening. And it has been a pleasure talking to you and with all of you. Thank you so much.
And he was a great assemblyman, too. Next up, Terry Raposa, front and center.
How you guys doing? Good. Getting tired of sitting? Yeah. You want to stand up and stretch for a second? Yeah. Go ahead. Also, we have more chairs up here if you want to sit down. Yeah, I know. Let's have a moment of friendliness. Okay? Say hi to one another. Hey, how you doing?
How are you? We're from Red Bluff. Yep.
Okay. You guys are friendly, that's for sure. Well, I guess the first thing that I should do is probably mention something. A lot of times people say they want to know a little bit about something about the speaker, so I'll be really brief on this. I was born in Palo Alto, California, at the Palo Alto Hospital, and I was born there because I wanted to be with my mother. It's pretty interesting tonight. I mean, it's, you come up here, you hear people like Mark. Was he good or what? Huh? That's the thing. Here's a man who's dedicating himself, running businesses, dedicating himself, getting up off the couch and doing something about this country, isn't he? Yeah. And isn't that what we need to do? Yeah. Now, I want to mention something else about that. There's Gail Brown, 23 years old, graduates college before she's 20. Couldn't get a job in Shasta County, couldn't get a job in Butte County, so she goes to Russia, to Moscow, to teach English. I want to mention somebody else here too. Robert Smith in the back here is 36 years old. He's the chair of the Declaration Committee for the state of Jefferson for Shasta County. On that board is Kayla Brown, she's 23 years old. On that board is Richard Achoya, 27 years old. 2 tours of Afghanistan. Where are the young people? State of Jefferson. They get it. And they're not too lazy to do something about it.
Only the smart ones.
The nice thing about this is that even in Wairika, the first event we had, back in August, wasn't it? Yeah. First event we had. The young gal who set the whole thing up, 23 years old, Elizabeth Bradley. We had 7 speakers that night. On the front end was Sheriff John Lopey, a great sheriff. On the back end was Mark Baird. And in between were 5 other speakers, nobody older than the age of 25.
Wow.
You see, this is different than 1941. This isn't about roads, this isn't about mines. This is about representation. Reynolds versus Sims. One man, one vote. That means that Jim Nielsen has what? 11 counties in Los Angeles County alone. 24 assemblymen, 11 senators. You see, we've got to change a lot of these things, and that's going to be changed by us. It's going to be changed by you making a phone call to your supervisor. Did everybody get one of those sheets with your supervisor's phone numbers on it? If you didn't get one, we want to make sure you get one. Because really and truly, that's something you can do. Pick up the phone. And remember, they're elected officials. You know, they're paying the same taxes you are. They're in the same situation in a lot of cases you are, and sometimes tougher. So please do that respectfully. On the flip side of that sheet is also the Glenn County supervisors. So anybody here from Glenn County? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. Anybody here from Dana County? I see Tom Nora over there. Oh, lots of people from Dana County. Oh, yeah. Shasta County? Siskiyou County? Huh? You know, the thing that's really interesting about this is people come across, at least to me, and when they talk to me about the state of Jefferson, I really haven't heard anybody put it down. Any of you guys heard that? And I want to show you how we're all in agreement on certain things. I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation because I've kind of got the attention span of a gnat. So I know what it's like to sit out there and listen to a bunch of people talk. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions real quick. I bet we all can agree. I don't care what party affiliation you are, whatever. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. First one is, how many people here want their government to spend the money right and be fiscally responsible? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people want limited government so that the government is looking at every aspect of your life? What? I had you at hello, huh? And how many people here want their constitutional rights upheld and they want the country to follow the Constitution? We are virtually the tip of the iceberg here. We're the tip of the iceberg because everything we're doing in the state of Jefferson is things that a lot of other states want to do. And I remember on September the 3rd, talking to Mark Baird, he made a comment to me saying, you know, if we don't get Siskiyou County tomorrow, we're dead in the water. Guess what? It went 4-1, didn't it? 20 days later, Modoc went 4-0. Red Bluff, don't you guys have something happening there in Dana County, huh? In June. That's right. So that's the thing. I mean, that's what we have to start looking at here. We have a situation where we can do something about this. The only way we're going to win this country back is starting at the local level. It's the only way you do it. It's local, state, fed. Oh my. That's the way we'll win it back. Now, I've gotten a lot of questions. I've spoke to a lot of people. And I've had people in the room that are from Republican Central Committees, Board of Supervisors, City Councils, you name it. One of the questions I always get is, well, you know, what makes you think if we go to another state it's going to change? Well, you want it to be the same? How many people here want it to be the same? How many people want it to change? The other question I ask is, out of the 800 laws that they pass a year, and the 10 laws they pass a day, how many of those laws don't make the law-abiding citizen a criminal? Yeah, that's the same answer I get everywhere.
I wonder how many actually read.
So the thing we have to realize is that at this point, until we change things and we have our own state, we're going to be in a position to be at the mercy of what people in Southern California want us to do. Now remember that they're our fellow countrymen. It isn't like they're bad people down there. They have different needs than we do. They have different situations than we do. So it's not just winning the hearts and minds of our friends and neighbors up here in the North State. It's there too. Now, I'm going to close by just saying this. How many people here think that if something's too hard, it shouldn't be done? Because isn't it the hard that makes it great? So with that, I will be pithy. I'll be under 5 minutes. And if you guys, I can't wait for your questions. I think that's the best part about this, because until you know what it is you care about in the state, example being, if you're in San Francisco, you probably don't care about the fire tax. If you're in Chico Town, you're up in arms about it. Everybody's got a dog in the hunt. And we want to hear your questions. And that's why I came here tonight. So with that, God bless you guys. Thank you guys. State of Jefferson.
And we got a couple other things on the agenda, and we're going to have a short Q&A, and I'm going to, we have our monitors for the mics to go out into the audience. We have those folks. Here we go. If you have questions, we have our panel, and we're going to let you address it to Bill. He's going to come around with mics. Just raise your hand if you've got a question. Other than Rich. Because Rich has already asked all the questions that could ever possibly be asked.
Gentlemen of the jury, please don't mind. I'm Thomas Jefferson. He died 4th of July, 1826. I came back 4th of July, 1944. And I'm eliminating the auto registration if you're not engaged in political activity. I haven't paid taxes since 1990.
That's enough. Yeah, that's enough. Okay. Now, if you have questions, maybe you can kind of line up over there behind Bill, and we'll just go right down the line. Now, we don't necessarily want any statements, okay? Just ask questions.
2 days ago, I read where a billionaire down in Silicon Valley was going to finance a referendum in order to create 6 states here in California. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and anybody else up there on the board.
Why don't we let Mark take that one, because I know he's ready. Terry. Oh, Terry, okay, go ahead.
That's Tim Draper, and he actually called me on Christmas Eve. We had a little discussion about some of this. Part of his plan could make some sense in a roundabout sort of way, but as it was explained, the idea of voting on states isn't even constitutional, number one. I find Tim to be a fine man, and I think his heart's in the right place. I think he eventually is going to be an ally. When we chatted, I also explained to him about Reynolds versus Sims, and he didn't know about that. So the way he broke it up, for example, the state that would be just below the state of Jefferson includes Sierra, it includes Nevada, it includes Yuba, Sutter, etc. A lot of counties that would be with us in the state of Jefferson. And there were 2 problems with that. One is they were included with Sacramento County, and when we were included in with Sacramento County, because of one man, one vote, and they have all the population, guess who's going to have all the assemblymen and the senators? So what happens to those counties? They get what? No representation again. So, not knowing that, he basically had made the statement that he had wished he had talked to Mark or one of us first, and we'll be having discussions with him, but that's as far as I'm going to go with that one, because pretty much it's already, the horse is out of the barn on that, and so we'll just wait and see. But I think the guy's heart's in the right place, and I think his intentions were good, and he's going to get a little more information on just exactly how it really does work constitutionally.
Sir, you mentioned how the process at the state level. Might you mention what happens at the federal level? And the other part of my question is, looking at the map of the counties, I would say at least 60% of the land in there is controlled by the Forest Service, BLM, or the National Park Service. So what effect would this have on the management of those public lands?
That's a good question. First of all, the process under Article 4, Section 3 legally is very simple. It calls for a majority of the state legislature must approve the split. The majority of the federal legislature, Congress and Senate, must approve the split. The president and the governor are not mentioned in the Constitution. We take that to mean it's not required to get their signature. We simply need a simple majority in both houses of the state and the federal government. Now, that's not an easy task, but it is an education. It's a task that we need to accomplish. We need to educate people in Southern California as to why they can help us with this, and it would be a win for them and a win for us. How would it be a win for them? because they have problems, as Terry said, that we can't even understand. They have large infrastructure problems, large water problems, gang problems, crime problems, urban problems. Those problems are so diametrically opposed to our way of life, we're no help to them. We can't help them, we don't have any input that's valid for their problems. So they would be free to concentrate their political power and their money to solve problems we don't understand and can't help them with. We, on the other hand, know we would win, because we would create a state framework with a regulatory environment and a business environment that would allow us to grow, and a constitutional framework that would enable the individual to make a living for himself and his family and to protect his property. So that would be a win-win for California. Now, as far as federal territory within the state of Jefferson, most of the counties in Northern California are blessed with the problem that the state and the feds control a great deal of property within the county. Siskiyou County, for example, it's something like 65%. So we have two problems here. Number one, we have a state that fails to abide by the laws that it writes for itself. For example, the State Fish and Game Commission owns almost 800 properties in the state of California, and although the state is not required to pay property taxes on property the state owns, they did agree when they began to purchase these properties after the Constitution was signed in 1872, they did agree to pay a sum of money called PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. Yet the Fish and Game has failed to pay their taxes for over 10 years to the counties of Northern California for the properties that they control. That's a tremendous deficit to county government because they rely on that money, and property taxes by and large remain in the county where they're collected. So what we could do as a state, number one, under the Equal Footing Act and the Enabling Act, it is possible for us to regain control, not of national forest land, because that's land held in trust, but we could possibly regain a good deal of BLM land, because that is, quote, public land. And under the Enabling Act and the Equal Footing Act, there's plenty of precedents. Alaska was the last in 1959. They regained control of 3.1 million acres of BLM land. They then took that land and they placed it back in beneficial use. In other words, they either sold it or they rented it out so they could regain property tax revenues from those lands. Now, under the Enabling Acts, all states that are created are supposed to have equal footing with other states. In other words, equal chance at success. So there is precedent that we may be able to regain control of some BLM land and at least place them back into beneficial uses, which would put them back on the property tax rolls. And that would be one way counties could make more revenue. And by the way, in the state we imagine, counties would have the lion's share of the profit, or the power, I'm sorry. So it would be county governments that decide how you're going to live in your county. And the state would do what states do best, which is act as a liaison with the federal government, administer federal programs, liaise between counties when they couldn't make up their minds about things, and administer state programs between the counties. And pretty much that's it. States should stay out of the business of the people. People govern from the bottom up. That's the way our Constitution was intended. So those are ways that we could regain revenue and also place our state on an equal footing with other states almost immediately. Does that answer your question?
I'm Mike Greer from Paradise School Board, and because I'm an educator, what I'm interested in is, as we look around, we're not young here, but you said up in Siskiyou County you have a lot of...
I beg your pardon?
But you feel young.
I might be 62, but I don't look a day over 61.
Not much. It's true. But what I want to know is, what are the plans to go ahead and reach out? Are there plans to go to, say, Butte College, Siskiyou, Shasta, on the college campuses to get those younger people? Because this is an educational thing. That's what we're here for tonight, is for education. Are there plans to do that with those other students to go for?
I'm going to share this one with Kayla because she's still in school and she knows a lot more about it than I do. But one thing I'd like to say about California's education process before I hand the microphone over, we spend more per student than any other state, and yet our test scores are down around 48, 2 from the bottom. So we're doing something wrong with that. And I imagine a state where we have a charter school or a voucher system where we can be more effective with our education dollars. Now I'm going to hand the rest of that off to Caleb.
The good and the bad thing is that a lot of young people use the internet excessively, quite excessively sometimes. And so we actually have, Robert, how many is it? 6, 7, 8,000 people on our Facebook pages?
I think we just topped over 8,000 last week.
We just topped over 8,000 young people on our Facebook pages. So we are reaching the young people. That's the quickest and fastest way to get hold of them. We also do have, again, I'm in school. I'm actually at an online grad school right now. My graduate thesis is on the state of Jefferson and statehood and how that all works. And I have 15 other military students in my class, and every single one of them said, "That's awesome." So every time you bring this up to students, I know Richard Ochoa is up at Shasta College, and he is posting flyers all around campus and talking to all the other students up there. And I don't think he's run into any resistance on the state of Jefferson either. So a lot of times it's just young people going out and just talking about the state of Jefferson, talking about the problems that are occurring, because young people really are involved. We do know that there's a lot of problems with the state, there's a lot of problems with the federal government as well. And we're looking around going, I know with my father, he said, get a college education because then you'll get a good job. And I kind of snicker at that now. But it used to be the truth that if you got an education, if you were a hard worker, you would have a job. So young people today are going, okay, wait a minute. That's not always the truth, so what happened here and how do we fix it? So your young people are involved despite Waters' World on O'Reilly.
My name is Brian Thomas, and I have a kind of a two-part question. The first part question that I have that I've not heard anything about tonight is what do you intend to do about the water rates, the water rights for the state of California? Because that is a huge issue, and that is one that will be litigated for who knows how many years if we're absolutely able to split the state. And the second thing that I have to say is that, there's been a lot of talk about Governor Jerry Brown tonight, and in the 1970s, that guy made so many promises to the people who were state employees of the state of California that there are state employees now who are retired that may be getting 80% of the highest salary that they ever made for a longer time than they actually worked. And so how are we going to pay those people if we split the state?
Well, I'm really glad you asked me that, sort of. Anyway, first water rights, and I am somewhat qualified to address that. I'm the president of one water rights group in Siskiyou County, and I was a vice president of the Siskiyou Water Users Association until last year. And we've been in a protracted fight, not so much for water rights, but for the use of the water we have a right to. So what I have to say first is there are a couple of problems with this. Number one, water rights are water rights. And it would be dishonorable and we would lack integrity to attack the water rights that are in place right now. We just can't do that. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. But what we can do is we can hold if we have our own state, and mind you, here's the problem. If we have our own state, a great many things are possible, none of which are possible if we fail to gain statehood. So with our own state, we can, for example, the water rights in the Central Valley were given up by California to the feds a long time ago to form the Central Valley Project. And so what we can do is we can hold our hand out to the feds as the state of Jefferson, and we can demand that they follow their own rules. Now what we found in Siskiyou County is 99% of the time that stopped them cold because they don't even know what their own rules are. For example, TMDL, which is part of federal EPA and state EPA and State Water Resources Control Board. They come to your river and they say, gosh, there's too much dirt in your river. And so we asked them, well, how much dirt is allowed? Well, we don't know. Well, how much dirt was here 100 years ago? Well, we don't know that either. So how do you know there's too much dirt now? Well, we made up a set of data. And with the data we made up, we came up with a model. And we're going to use this model to show you what your river might just possibly be capable of achieving in a perfect world, and you're going to adhere to that. And so we asked them one question: who's your data quality assessment officer? And under the Data Quality Act, you have to have one. They didn't even know what that was. And then we asked them, are you in compliance with the Regulatory Flexibility Act? They didn't know what that was either. Well, in short, that was the end of the meeting, and they left, and that was a year and a half ago, and they haven't been back. So what we can do as a state, if we have a state, and part of our problem is that California doesn't insist that the federal government follow the law. They let the federal government do pretty much whatever they want to. NOAA Fisheries, and all of those agencies, they run around Northern California with armed agents Mirandizing hardworking private citizens because they're complaining about a fish in a jurisdiction they don't even control. But California does not provide the backbone that your county government needs to demand that the federal government follow the law. They do not demand that the federal government coordinate. Coordination is a federal statute. The feds are bound by law to follow the coordination statutes. Why don't they do it? Because the state doesn't insist that they do it, and counties, as an arm of the state, are not in a position to make that demand themselves. They can try, but it's very difficult and very complex, and quite often they fail because the procedure is extremely complex. As a state, we can form a regulatory framework where we demand that the federal government follows the law. And 95% of the time, that's the end of the argument because they don't even know what the law is half the time. So, and then the other half of your question, so that would take care of the water rights. And then the other half of your question has to do with public employee pensions. Here's our problem. When you make a promise to a guy that works his whole life, and he bases his life upon the promises you made him, you can't break that promise. So at some point, you have to fulfill the oath you made to the individuals involved, and you have to honor that pension. Now, in the state of Jefferson, we're going to have to do things different because we can't afford a California-style bureaucracy, and we don't want one. So what we will have to do is come up with some kind of cutoff where people who are vested, we honor the contract. There's no other thing to do that's honorable or shows any integrity on our part. And so what we can do is come up with some kind of cutoff point, and from that point on, we move from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. No one can guarantee an 8% retirement forever. The taxpayers can't shoulder that burden. But what we can do is we can define a contribution that's fair and equitable to the employee. It's much like a 401k that the employer contributes to. And from that point on, that's how we do it. And then as time goes by and those liabilities do not go unfunded, our state will become more and more fiscally sound as time goes by, as opposed to California that has something near to $900 billion. And for those of you that aren't really math friendly, that's $900,000 million. We're in the hole on unfunded liabilities. And $420 billion, that's $420,000 million, we're in the hole, and that's just the debt anybody can find out about on the internet. We must cure that debt, and we have to move toward a defined contribution plan and away from a defined benefit plan.
Bill, we've got time for probably 3 more quick questions because we want to stay on schedule here.
It seems everyone here is very like-minded. My question would be, who would be in opposition to the state of Jefferson and why?
The people that are primarily in opposition to this are in opposition to anything that's not status quo. Look, let's face it, all animals like things that don't change. It's easier to follow a routine. The dog knows when he's supposed to be fed. Heck, when I'm 20 minutes late feeding the horses, they're standing there pawing at the gate saying, where's that moron with the hay? They know what time it is better than I do. Animals hate change. But we must have change if we're going to survive. And in order to survive, we must have our own state where we can define the rules, and the rules have to meet our expectations and meet our needs, our historic, our moral, culture, and so on. We have to be able to form a state with laws that benefit us and representation that does as we wish.
A little bit about regulations, AB 32, EPA, and the Endangered Species Act, which I think controlled all the jobs that we don't have.
Well, once again, we use the 10th Amendment as a state, and by the way, that's something your county doesn't have the power to do. You have good people in government here, but they only have so much power. They depend upon a state framework in order to give them the regulatory power to tell the feds that you can't act like that when you're in this county. So what we do is use the 10th Amendment to force the EPA to follow their own rules, and they can't do it because they don't even know what their own rules are, and they don't know how to follow them when they do know what they are.
Yeah, I'm Greg Olson. Isn't it true that the state of California has to pay their pensions for their workers? It wouldn't be transferred to the state of Jefferson?
Well, here's the deal, and once again, if we don't do this in a way that's right and in a way that's honorable, that makes us no better than they are, and personally, I don't want anything to do with that. So what we have a certain amount of debt that this state has incurred, and we weren't frozen in ice when it occurred. So we were part of the problem. The reason we have this government is because we were all asleep and we didn't do anything about it when we could have and we should have. This is all our own fault. Remember, we don't get the government we negotiate for, we get the government we allow. Well, we've allowed this, but we can stop it. And what happens is, when we have the committees of separation, the debt is going to be apportioned. If we insist that they work with Sims versus Reynolds, which is what they seem to want to do, we could walk away from the rest of the state with 3% of the debt because we only have 3% of the people. Now, 3% of that debt is manageable now, but if we wait 20 years until it's $5 trillion, it may not be then. That's why we need to act now while the debt is manageable, and we can take that 3% and apportion it out and figure out a way to pay it off. Is it going to be easy? No. I'm not suggesting, as some people in government do, well, the state of Jefferson can't survive because economically it's not viable. That's the wrong question. The question isn't, can we survive? The question is, can we get away from California before the debt Titanic sinks? And that's the question we should be asking. This debt, according to CaliforniaDebtClock.org, is going up at about $4,000 a minute of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year. We need to escape that debt and form our own state that's fiscally responsible before we can't manage our portion of it, and before California goes bankrupt, which it inevitably will. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say that I believe that those people who have already retired from the state of California, California was still required to pay their pension. Those people that are still employed by California who would then become employees of the state of Jefferson, those would be the people that we would have to work with in order to make sure that they're not screwed by the transition.
Okay, yeah, I like the way you put that, and that's a question I get all the time. People ask me, well, if we form the state of Jefferson, what happens to my CalPERS, because I'm already retired? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing happens to your CalPERS. In fact, you'd get a 10% raise because you'd be moving to a state where the taxes are lower. So, and also, when you talk about your Social Security, what happens to your Social Security? Nothing. What happens to your Medicare? Nothing. So the programs that are in place from the federal government and programs that you're already vested in, those programs won't stop. But when we form a state structure, then we're going to need to deal with employee pensions, and we're going to deal with that in a way that's fair to the employee and doesn't break the taxpayer at the same time, and it's going to be more along with what the private sector has, a defined contribution plan and 401ks. That's the way the rest of us have to live. That's only fair. If that is the last question, I'd like to thank you. Wait, we might have one more.
I think that was...
I think we've got one more question.
There's a quick one. This lady right here.
This lady here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to know how feasible is it really for our state to vote for us to do this, and then the feds? I don't see them doing that.
Well,
They have a water, well, you already addressed that, but is it really feasible that they can actually vote to let us?
I'm an airplane pilot too. That's my day job because, of course, farming pays so much anymore you can't afford to stay home. And I've been to every crumb hole in the world. I've been to 6 wars for the United States government, and I'm here to tell you that places where people's lives work, they have representation that they can look in the eye. And places where their lives don't work, they have representation that governs from afar with no empathy for the individual. Is this feasible? I'm not a big time waster. If I didn't think we could do it, I am way too busy to be sitting here wasting y'all's time. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. Do we have to do it? Yes, it's a matter of survival. So we better make it feasible. And if we do our jobs correctly, if we help people in Southern California understand how this is a win for them and a win for us, and we can educate our legislators, I think it is feasible, and we have a narrow window. Because every day, California feeds us the ammunition we need to be dissatisfied. The potty bill, AB 32, CARB, cap and trade, I could go on for hours. We have plenty of of groundwork. We have plenty of basis. We have plenty of reasons to leave. All we need to do is help them understand how they would be ahead in allowing us to go. And that's just a sales job.
Now, we've got a drawing coming up, and, we had one last question?
Are you looking to be governor?
We'd like him to be.
No, ma'am. I'm looking to go home. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go home to a state where my children and my grandchildren can live.